Okay, Richard. So on a scale of 1 to what the hell, how much did you expect to see Barkley again?
What the hell?
I thought so. What?
And in a very weird context, nonetheless. But it's good to see that he's found a better place for himself because he didn't quite belong on the Enterprise. But in a research situation, probably pretty good.
I'm a little confused about the timing of this. I guess that when the Enterprise was destroyed at the end of Generations, which
Yeah.
happened, I think, like 6 months before this episode of Voyager, that he got transferred off and went to the Jupiter Research Station and started
Well,
working with Louis Zimmerman, which is all fine.
when is the last time we've seen Barkley, though? Because it could have been he got silent and he transferred off the Enterprise in the last half of the last season, for example.
I don't actually know. I think it may have been State of Fear, the episode where with the transporter monsters.
Yeah. And I guess, again, that situation might have been what led him to think, researching this stuff is so much fun. I'm going to get a job as a research guy.
I suppose that's true. I just wonder about the fact that he is apparently in charge of the interpersonal programming. That seems like either a little bit of an in-joke on Brown and Braga's part or just a really bad call on Starfleet's part.
Either that or this is an episode where what's real, what's not real, and could it be that just Barkley is not Zimmerman's assistant in real life, but this is just a mixed up memory and they just wanted, I don't know. I mean, this whole episode was kind of a mess in a way. So I'm not sure if why exactly Barkley got his job is what makes the episode fall apart, but
I don't know, because projections to me, I can never decide if I really like this episode or really don't like it. And it is the case where we haven't engaged with Brandon Braga in a long time. And I know that we talked about him somewhat in the TNG podcast back in 1972. And it was the case where I think he definitely does this kind of episode a lot, which is this sort of mindfucky, very sci-fi-ish, very sort of not character heavy, just kind of this Pandora's box mystery of what the hell is going on. And this is another one of those episodes. I think that in terms of how it develops the Doctor, I think it's a very interesting episode, and we will definitely talk about that. I think perhaps the very last fake out goes a little too far, but that
is, I think, where I feel like this would be an interesting episode to rewatch knowing the twist of it, because I did have the idea. One of my first notes was, I wonder if this is all just fake for some reason. I had thought it was a simulated test to see if he could handle getting these projectors to be around the ship, or this was his promotion exam that was just thrust upon him, and that's the Starfleet way.
That could certainly be the case. I think that, opening it in Media Race is obviously a Brown and Braga device, and I think that kind of establishing it is not the Doctor not really knowing what's going on. There's a lot of things in the episode that are very fun and interesting. I like the fact that, aside from the fact that why is Barkley in the episode, it's not a bad idea to use the character. I don't think that I would have chosen to use Barkley, but I think he works, and Barkley is definitely a character that, I was never a huge fan of, but I think that he worked okay on TNG, and I think that he's obviously developed a little bit more, and he got away from the I don't know, I remember us talking about it and saying, it seemed to me that everyone on the Enterprise was just being very, very dicky to him for no reason. So I'm glad that he got away from his high school tormentors or something. I don't know, but he seems like he's come into his own. Obviously this is not the real Barkley, so who the hell knows? But on the other hand, it's the case where having the Doctor question his own reality, having the Doctor have to really grapple with an existential question, establishes him as a person that is really starting to come into his own, I think.
Towards the end, he is essentially given the choice between, I mean, Barclay even states it very bluntly towards the end. He says, well, which would you rather think you are? A human who has a wife, has a family, has an assistant, has a job, or a hologram on a ship that's stranded in the middle of nowhere? And I think it's Chakotay says, well, it doesn't really matter what you want to be, it's what you are. I think this defines the Doctor as not wanting to be human in a way. It's not like he is not Data. Data would choice between which would you rather be. Sure, Data would choose what things are, but he would want to be the human with the family, with the job, with the assistant. And I don't think the Doctor is seduced by that lifestyle. He is what he is, and he is getting more dignity. I mean, frankly, Voyager is the Doctor's opportunity to grow and become a person, even if he is not human. It is an opportunity he would not have had if he had his program had just been used as intended.
No, I agree with all that, and I think that one of the things that is interesting about the Doctor in comparison with Data, because of course Data was Pinocchio, right? Data was the boy who wanted to become human, and the Doctor is not. The Doctor is someone that has been activated very recently. I mean, Data, of course, was around for a lot longer before we first met him on the Enterprise, so he had an opportunity to develop a personality already. We are kind of seeing the Doctor develop beyond the capabilities of his programming or whatever. I mean, if it's sort of this heuristic learning capabilities or artificial intelligence or whatever it is, when he first started out, when he was first activated, and we actually go back to the moment he was first activated, which is a nice little, a nice little moment. He was basically a competent asshole, and he is definitely becoming, I think, a very different person. He is starting to develop a personality, and he is also developing his personality, I think, under very, very extreme circumstances, under a lot of stress. I mean, I think that he's probably being asked to do a lot of things that even a human Doctor might struggle with.
Yeah.
Or not. I mean, I guess I shouldn't say human, but a quote unquote real Doctor. And I think that for the Doctor, he's looking at this and he's saying, well, I may not want to be here. And I think that's what this episode is really about. I may not want to be here. I may not have chosen to be here, but I am here. And there's also, I think, a fundamental respect that Chakotay is giving him because, I don't know why it's Chakotay really. I mean, it could have been anybody, but it's interesting to me that
Chakotay, I want to say, just to interject, he doesn't really have any parts in the rest of the episode. He's kind of the only character that the Doctor doesn't interact with, and so I think it does help it be a little less confusing. In other words, Chakotay's always outside the simulation.
I think that's probably a good point. Yeah, and I think that...
And also, it's also not incidental that the Native American character is the one who kind of becomes the spirit guide out of this place to him either.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly true. And I do think that having it be Chakotay, aside from that, is also... It is the case where something like initiations, for example, Chakotay is developing into a very, very... not a passive person, but a spiritual, a pacifist, right? And he is someone who is... open to new experiences and is able to, I think, go between worlds very easily. And so it being Chakotay kind of makes sense for that reason. It's another sort of step into his personality. I can see Janeway, for example, being a bit too aggressive with the Doctor in this instance, and perhaps the Doctor deciding not to trust her. And so, I mean, but I also think that the other thing that this makes me think of is, how Janeway, how the other crew members treated the Doctor when he was first activated. And it was really Kes that pushed him forward and pushed everyone else to accept him as a real person, quote unquote, because he had to he had to do that, because I think that if he didn't, he would have stopped wanting to help them. I mean, they were all being kind of being kind of dicks to him. And I think, you see that nice little moment, for example, when he deletes Paris.
Yeah. You saying this is actually making me wonder if the ending scene would have been stronger is if instead of Chakotay, it was Kes, and that way you have her both in the role of the wife and as Kes, and both of them are in a way saying, pick my side, I'm the real one. It may have been a bit more visually striking and more of a hearkening to Kes being the one who does treat him like a person first and does begin to open the crew up to the idea of thinking of the Doctor as a person.
I mean, I think that's a good point. I don't know if it being Kes would have been a little too far, because again, you keep saying she's a Mary Sue character, which I don't disagree with.
Yes, of course.
We will talk about Elogium in a few minutes. But,
I am really excited to talk about Elogium, but
I'm glad one of us is. That it's the case that I think, I don't know, Kes being his wife is interesting, because it's almost the case that I think the Doctor is sort of, I mean, well, there's two things that are going on. Number one, of course, is that the Doctor is now able to dream, essentially, and that he is creating this sort of fantasy in some sort of way to protect himself from this radiation or whatever. It doesn't really matter. But the case is that he does latch on to Kes as a very, very strong figure in his life that he has romantic and sexual feelings for. I mean, that is essentially what he is doing. And I think that, I don't know that would have been the choice that I would have made, but
I mean,
does it work? I don't know.
I think that certainly Kes is the Doctor's wife in as much as that she is the person that he lays his fears out to, the person that he works with, the person who, I mean, the two of them do have an extraordinarily close relationship. If she's not his wife, she's his best friend, certainly. And I mean, in a way, but I mean, Kes certainly has Neelix, and Kes will insist to Neelix time and time again, like, I'm happy, I can have friends outside of you, but that doesn't.
Well, I want to talk about Neelix, but yeah.
Yeah, I would say, well, we will get into that more. I'm just focusing on Kes in this right now. Kes certainly doesn't view the Doctor as a romantic partner, but she still, again, the two of them are very close, are intimate with each other. They have helped each other to grow and become better people together. So to fit him, to put this in a more mundane context, into the context of the kind of life that Louis Zimmerman is having, Kes would slot probably best into the wife slot in a way, again, given the amount of intimacy and mutual trust and all of that between the two of them. I think the ending kind of suggests that, again, in real life, the Doctor doesn't feel this way. He doesn't want to date Kes necessarily. And right. I feel like when the show inevitably goes that route, it will be missing the point of it, because I know the show will inevitably go down that route.
I don't know, because I mean, to some degree, yes, I think that you're right, that this kind of relationship between a man and a woman slots very easily into a romantic and sexual connection. And, I know we promised a while ago not to talk about straight people anymore, but it is the case where I think yes, that is definitely true. But at the same time, it seems to be a failure of imagination. I mean,
I don't know, because I think that things are a little more queer in the Delta Quadrant than they are in the Alpha Quadrant, aren't they? I mean, in Elogium, we are going to learn about a form of reproduction that is as far apart from heteronormativity as we from. In the next episode, we are going to be talking about a form of reproduction that is as far from standard heterosexual reproduction as we know it. And so, of course, the Alpha Quadrant version of the Doctor is going to be in marriage rather than in a platonic close friendship with somebody. I don't know, maybe that's stretching it a little further, but I do get the sense that this is one of those where they don't, again, Voyager needs to have certain rules and standards, and in order to remember who they are and stay true to their values. But again, this is, I find I'm very much leading into the next episode already. Right. They have to be aware that they are very far from home, that things are different, and that they may not necessarily have the same standards of decorum just because it's lonely and it sucks and we've got to find comfort where we can.
Well, yeah, I guess that's a good segue to my next question, which is that the Doctor in this episode, they seem to be sort of hinting around the edges at the Doctor's loneliness. I mean, the Doctor, I don't think it's incidental that the Doctor is fantasizing about being able to leave sickbay, right?
Yeah, and so at the end of that is just a fantasy. At the end of the episode, I was actually slightly unclear on that, whether the projections were real or not.
No. I mean, he's not able. I mean, he's able to go to the holodeck because the holodeck has holographic projectors, and he's able to be in sickbay because sickbay was designed to have holographic projectors. Sure.
But this actual technology has not been installed, although it is possible that as a result of him dreaming this, he may mention it to B'Elanna, who may decide, hey, that's a really interesting project to work on. So I've said I feel like the Doctor will be getting more of a run of the ship and eventually maybe even outside just to give him different stories.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see that you definitely can see that happening. And I think that for me, what's interesting about this episode, aside from Cass and Barclay, is that the Doctor is alone for a lot of it, and he is dealing with people that he thinks are real or not real. And I think it is really hinting at the fact that perhaps he's latching onto Cass not because he has any romantic feelings for her, but because she is the only person who is consistently around it in his life in a non-professional capacity. I mean, I think she likes the Doctor. I think she respects the Doctor. I mean, we don't see the real Cass in this episode, except I think for the very end. But it is the case that I don't know to what degree we're supposed to be left with the question of how is the Doctor going to come to terms with his loneliness? Yeah. I mean, that seems like a question that may be a little too far afield for this show.
Yeah, I think that is so. He has, because he does have a very strong loneliness that Data never had. Data would never admit to. Data had friendship. But he wouldn't have. I don't think he would really admit to being lonely or feeling alone.
Right.
In a way, it is certainly another step from Odo as well, though, who did recognize his singular nature did make him fairly alone. And the Doctor has a lot of the same issues that Odo did. He's the only one of his kind around. People can't necessarily see the world through his eyes. He can have very close connections to Kes, and she certainly knows what it's like to be very, very alone and the only one of her species around. But she has Neelix. Neelix certainly has his backstory, but he and the Doctor don't seem to be getting along. The Doctor doesn't really have anybody who understands, oh, that's exactly what it's like to be a holographic life form. To suddenly pop into existence, to have more of an existence than you ever expected or to have.
But I think at the same time, the Doctor is comforted by that. I mean, I think that's what the point of that last shot is, where he's sticking his arm out of sickbay, and his arm disappears, of course, because there are no holographic projectors in the hallway, and he seems very comforted by that.
Well, yeah, of course, he recognizes that finally he's back in reality, and he knows who he is, and even if things are getting much better for him through his time at Voyager, because the crew are starting to view him as one of their own, and they may have had a little trouble at the beginning understanding him as a person. He had a little trouble at the beginning understanding himself as a person, but they're all getting used to each other, and they're understanding each other, and they're getting along and appreciating him for what he is.
Yeah, I think that's right. Now, in terms of leaving aside all of the interpersonal stuff for a moment, we kind of talked about this a little bit at the beginning, but how do you feel about the actual construction of the episode? Do you think it was a satisfying mystery? Were you confused? Were you able to follow along with it? I always find that I think that this episode is very strong it's very strong in its construction, I think, again, until the very end when it just goes a little bit too far. But for the most part, I really like the way that it's piling its mysteries upon itself.
It's not, again, Brandon Braga writes these episodes, but he is very good at them, and the pieces all fit, even if it's not the most elegant picture ever. It all makes sense. I think at all times he knows what level of reality we're in, what is going on, what of this is real, what is simply inspired from, what is spinning off of something. And I think they're able to make it clear at the end what was what, in a way.
Yeah. And I also think that that's all true. And maybe the last thing to say before we move on to Elogium is that, interestingly enough, we see Janeway, we see Neelix, we see Kes, Paris, I think Kim, B'Elanna, but we are not seeing the real them. We are seeing, I think, what the doctor's opinions of those people are. And I don't know that they're very different from the real people, but they are sort of archetypes of themselves. I just think that's kind of interesting, who the doctor picks to see in his subconscious and how they're acting. I mean,
I didn't pick up on that at all. That being one of those first time through and not knowing the mystery. I'm not really looking at I think that will be interesting to rewatch, and knowing that these are projections themselves.
Yeah, because I mean, B'Elanna is B'Elanna pretty much. Neelix is being attacked by a Kazon, which I think is interesting, because I think that may indicate
a cook.
Right. Like, I think the doctor doesn't have a high opinion of Neelix. I'll just leave it at that. But for the most part, I think that they're all pretty close to the real people, and I don't know if that's a failure of imagination on Brian and Braga's part, or if that's just how the doctor is. Maybe the doctor is very literal because he's a hologram. I don't know.
I don't know, but it does make sense that the doctor would not like Neelix, because I'm sure Neelix is just a total asshole to him because out of his jealousy, and he's probably just always snapping at the doctor for no reason. After the doctor saved his fucking life.
Yeah. Well, the doctor saved his life twice, didn't he? So we can use that as a segue to move into Elogium then, because Neelix's quick and sudden turn into being some sort of weird, jealous men's rights activist. I don't know who the fuck thought this was an interesting character choice for Neelix. He didn't act this way in any previous episode, and then suddenly at the end of projections, he's violently jealous of the doctor. And then in the beginning of Elogium, he's uncomfortably jealous about Paris and berating Kes for talking to a man. And I know if
he has that awful line like that's how men are. I know, I used to be like that, which is a sign that you were a really shitty guy before you started dating this person who is probably the only good thing in your life right now. Like that's not, again, I do not begrudge Neelix for having learned some wrong lessons given the horrors that are in his background. At the same time, he needs to get the hell over all of this, because dude, you're essentially in the Federation now.
Right. And I think that part of it is, I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm watching The Handmaid's Tale, but I think that it's the case that I look at this and I say, okay, well, this is obviously jealousy comes from a place of insecurity, right? For the most part. And obviously jealousy is not a good thing. Men are not in control of women. Women can take care of themselves. They are independent entities of men and all that stuff, right? But at the same time, I think that I look at this and I say, okay, well, Neelix, if you look at his backstory from Jantrell, he was married, he had a family. I don't think he had kids, or maybe I don't remember. I don't think he had kids, but he had a family. He had a niece or something. He was in the army. He was a guy. He had a life. And then that was all taken away from him in very horrible circumstances. And he decided to go off and become the outrageous Akana of the Delta Quadrant. And so he would be feeling insecure. He would be feeling alone. He would be feeling all of these things. Then here he meets Kes. He meets this beautiful woman who he decides to be in a relationship with. But all of his problems, all of his insecurities are still there. I think that is a fine way to approach it. I think that
I would say also keep in mind the people that he is jealous of. Tom Paris, who is much more handsome than Neelix is. He's a pilot and all of that. The doctor, who is a doctor, who is teaching Kes how to become a doctor herself. What Neelix can cook, and he's kind of funny again, but he's weird looking. I think he doesn't necessarily trust Kes when she says, like, I'm happy, you're fine, I love you, which is, I think, a common thing that men have, that they still need to get the hell over, but because it is not fair to Kes, it's not fair to Tom Paris, it's not fair to the Doctor, it's not fair to that attitude is just unfair to everybody.
Well, it's unfair to everybody, but it's also deeply, deeply creepy and misogynistic. And I think that I don't know, because to me, I look at it and I say, I mean, I kind of agree with that, but at the same time, Neelix's jealousy coming from a place of low self-esteem and insecurity is one thing, but we are still talking about a television show that should know better than to have a violently jealous, creepy man. And I think that they're not, the problem is that I don't think that they're really engaging with it. I don't think that they're questioning it. I don't think that they're saying that this is bad. I just think that they are saying, hey, you know what? Neelix needs a new character beat, so let's make him violently jealous.
Well, there is a degree of that's just how men are, almost, that's implied, or this is normal. And Kes is saintly that when she is going through an extreme Kes is such that when she is going through her species equivalent of Ponfar, she is still this extraordinarily patient, willing to talk it through, dealing with his insecurity. She only gets mildly upset.
Well, I don't think that Kes comes across as great in this episode either. I think that this episode has real problems for how it treats men and women both, and I think that, I mean, Kes
in a Star Trek show,
right? I mean, Kes essentially browbeats Neelix into having a child with her, which I don't think is a great look. I mean, if you accept the fact that women are in control of their own bodies and can decide what to do with them, then men are also in control of their own bodies and can decide what to do with them. And this is the 24th century. There are no 20th, 21st century gender politics. There are no politicians going around saying that women are just hosts, right? None of this is true in the Federation. None of these people grow up in that sort of society. Now, we don't know what kind of society Talax had, so maybe it was deeply, deeply misogynistic. I don't know. But I don't think that Kes comes across great in this episode either.
Yeah, I mean, let me put it this way. It certainly doesn't seem like Kes's society was particularly misogynistic either. We from the little that we see of it in Caretaker, it seems that the Caretaker loves everybody equally, kind of a thing.
Yeah, but I don't know. I don't think that they ever really met the Caretaker, did they? I mean, the Caretaker was up on his space station. Yeah,
no. But again, the little that we see of our society implies that they know that the Caretaker exists, right? They know that there is somebody providing for all of them. And so one assumes that they would structure their society a little more laterally in that way.
I don't know. I mean, why would you think that? I don't know that. Why?
So then I guess the implication is that I don't know. I get the sense that, I don't know. I don't think Kes is a person who has internalized the inferiority of women based on her own culture. And so whether that means that she's rebelled against her culture, she has left it after all, or that her culture has taught her some kind of equality between men and women and all are, lower than the Caretaker, certainly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that
either way, we're getting into fanficky weeds, but
yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that to some respects, to ground this back into the episode, I do think that we do have to grapple with the fact that Neelix and Kes are in this relationship, and that this thing is happening to Kes, and she is obviously going into, I mean, I hate to say this, but she's going into heat prematurely. And so I think that is affecting her, obviously, on a hormonal level, on a mental level, on an emotional level. It's a very stressful time for her.
On a practical level, because there is the sense of this is now or never. If this were something that she would... If she would have another opportunity in even 5 years, let's say, this would not be as big of a deal because, okay, we can go around the next time.
Right. And I think in terms of, I mean, we haven't really talked about what it means that Kes's species, the Ocampa, only live for 9 or 10 years.
Yeah.
I do think that it does make a certain amount of sense that they would have this sort of reproductive thing, that it is very different from what we're used to, as you said before, that they can only do it once because it's very, very intensive on your body to have a child. And so if you only live for 9 or 10 years, having a child, at year 4 or 5, that's pretty much all you can do. And then then you can get your child to a point where they're ready to have a child and then you die. I think that's kind of an interesting way to develop this species.
Around the halfway point of life. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, because it kind of like, okay, well, I am ready to have you go off and do this, and then I'm going to die essentially.
Yeah, you do a year with the grandkid, and then you go off peacefully.
Yeah, you see your grandkid for maybe 6 months or a year, and then you go off and you meet your maker, you meet the caretaker. I think that's an interesting choice. I also think that it's a little. I mean, let's talk about the fact that Kes is in a romantic, if not sexual, relationship with Neelix, because at least to me in this episode, it seems to be clear that Neelix and Kes have not had sex. So they have separate quarters. They have not had sex before. Neelix is obviously very interested very into the idea of having sex with Kes, because I assume that she's an attractive woman. But part of it is that you could read this one of two ways, right? You could say that either it's deeply creepy that Neelix is having a romantic relationship with a person who has not yet entered puberty, but on the other hand, it doesn't seem like Ocampa puberty really tracks onto the sort of puberty that we are used to.
It's not an analog. I mean, the implication is that she is fully grown, and that this is, again, if 90 years, if that humans live at the outside 90 years, assuming if they had a benevolent God taking care of them the proper way, most would live to around 90 years or so. And so each year of Kes's life tracks to, so she's the equivalent she's the equivalent of being about 20 at this point then.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
When she would really have a child around 40. So yeah, it doesn't really analog, but I guess one of the implications is that, and I am going to hell for asking the question, but assuming that Neelix has a penis, does Kes have a vagina? Because I don't know if she does. They mention that there is a sack on her back that carries the child. When she's talking about the process, she holds up her hands and says, "We need to be bonded for 6 hours." So assumedly something is going with the hand, kind of a thing. Like whatever the reproductive process that Kes's species goes, it's not what we know. I don't think she can do what we imagine as what we know as sexual intercourse by any human definition, gay or straight. And so maybe they don't have a sexual relationship because they can't. It's just there is no tab A or a slot B in the equation.
Well, yeah, I think that's a good question, and it's something that I was wondering about as well, because you're right that I don't know that the Ocampa actually have sexual desire or a sexual ability in the same way that most other species that we've seen on Star Trek do. I mean, in general, species on Star Trek have sex in a very similar way to humans. Yeah. It may not be exactly the same, but there's a tab A going into slot B, as you say.
Yeah.
And I don't, part of me says I don't know how well thought out Ocampa sexuality is, because what exactly is going on with Kes, I don't know. She's got this weird orange stuff on her hands.
I mean, it reminds
like pollen.
Me. Yeah. It reminds me almost of the sticky parts of flowers that catch pollen, sure, but then if that's a thing, Neelix isn't producing the kind of pollen that will fertilize her anyway, is he?
No. So and then there's something about someone has to massage her feet until her tongue swells. There is a degree to which I think it's just a bunch of weird shit that the writer thought was going to be fun, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense.
Because it doesn't. Yeah. I mean, when she is at her most sexually voracious, when she is at the point when she wants to have a baby with her boyfriend, she is growing very pale, having a fever, sweating, her palms get a green goo, her tongue swells. Like, this is not
attractive.
Yeah, this is the opposite of everything that, again, I think part of it is what's the opposite of what humans would find attractive and desirable and sexy, and let's do that, because of course remember that the other plot that the ship is dealing with is of a very weird and bizarre sexuality that we don't find attractive, but doesn't matter. That's what the species does. Neelix is very give him credit that he is game for doing whatever Kes wants in the service of having a baby, because it probably again we're going to assume that Talaxians have standard humanoid sex too.
I mean, it seems to be. He seems very excited about the idea of mating with Kes, so I would assume that he has a penis. I mean, I don't really want to think about Neelix's penis, but I'm sure it exists. Now,
his penis.
Very well played. So aside from this whole mess that I think we've done about as good a job as we can analyzing, what do you think this means for the future of Neelix and Kes's relationship? Because to me, this really seems to be a turning point. I don't know that they're going to be as close as they used to be.
Yeah, I mean, they end it with saying, well, due to the Deus Ex Machina, I'll be able to have a kid again, so that'll be great. And Neelix saying, all right, that's great, that's fine, it's sad, but we'll deal with it. But even knowing that Kes does not finish out the run of the series, I don't see them spending the rest of the... they're not going to spend the next 7 years of Kes's life together. Let's put it that way. I don't.
Yeah.
And one also wonders if, my questions are about what Kes's society is. If you don't mate and have a child until you're 40, does that? Is somebody of Kes's age expected to be dating a lot of different guys? Because since there is no sex really involved, it is very close friendships with other people. I mean, is she so easily able to be close with the Doctor and Tom Paris and everybody because they're one big family and everybody's encouraged, and then you find the one you find the most special, and then you have a child with them at age 40, and she certainly believes that Neelix is that special one, but I don't know. I mean, I think even her interactions with other people are different from normal, quote-unquote, humanoid sexuality in a way that I don't know if Neelix is going to be able to keep making that, be open to that for the rest of their relationship. She is always going to be a person who is going to have a lot of friends. I don't know if he can deal with that.
Yeah, I definitely don't. I mean, we started off this conversation talking about Neelix's newfound, insane jealousy, which I'm not a fan of. Yeah. But it is the case that I think that's true, and I also think that Neelix has a ton of growing up to do that he has not done. I mean, we don't know how old Neelix is. I mean, let's say he's 40, or the equivalent of 40. So he is older than Kes, at least in terms of maturation levels. But in the sense that I think. I keep going back to that scene with Tuvok and Neelix in the mess hall where they're talking about having a child, and Tuvok is about 100 years old, I think 90 years old, something like that. So in terms of Vulcan lifespan, he's middle aged, and he has had his children. He has 4 children. You see a Vulcan that is talking about loving his children, even though he does not use that word, and he kind of convinces Neelix that it's something that is proper and desirable to do. Yeah. And I think for Neelix, that's a moment of growing up. But I think that in a certain sense, I've always gotten the impression that Kes, even though she is quote unquote younger than Neelix, she is much more mature than him. Yeah. I think she knows who she is a lot more than Neelix does. And I think that at some point, this relationship is going to come to an end, only because Kes is not going to feel that Neelix is driving her forward anymore, and I don't think that she's going to want to have to deal with him.
Well, I think of it this way, because at the episode when they first find out she's really excited about having a child, Neelix is not, and then Neelix talks to Tuvok, gets all fired up because of how much Tuvok talks about, and yes, this is going to be great, and so in a moment of passion, he's deciding, yes, let's go have a child. Meanwhile, Kes is recovering from her moment of passion of, this is the last time I can have a baby, and so I must have to have a baby right now or I'm never going to have a baby. And then when she's with the Doctor and talking it out, and she is calming down, and, the rational part is taking over, and she's realizing, I'm on the ship in the middle of nowhere. I'm not going to be having a child in the way I kind of wanted to with, this passage between my dad and me, and realizing that I'm an adult. I can't continue my medical studies if we're dealing with the child. Having the child is not the responsible. That's her in her moment of, in a way, clarity. And she comes to the decision that this isn't the right choice at this point in time. If this had been 2 years later, if they had been on her home planet, if her father had been around, maybe things would be different, but that isn't it. And so she's really, again, he's getting fired up to have a child. That's the moment of passion. I don't know if Neelix really does want to have a kid. I think he just likes the idea of having the kid at this point, which is not to say he'd be a bad father, which is not to say any of that, but I think at the end they both are. Kes is the one, I think, making the more responsible decision to not become a teen mom. And he's saying, well, I'm 35, but my, 17-year-old girlfriend, we're going to have a great life together. That's the equivalent of what this is. And
are you starting to see why I find the Neelix and Kes relationship to be sort of problematic?
No, it wasn't really until this episode that, again, there was always an age disparity between the two of them, sure, but it wasn't really. This is the episode in which it really, you have that moment in which where it's clear that, oh, they really are that much younger. She really is that much younger than he is. And I mean, right now, this episode is reminding me a little of Manhattan with Woody Allen. So,
well, aside from the Neelix and Kes stuff, I think that let's move aside from that for a minute. And let's talk about the other thing that I want to talk about with Elogium, which is the aliens. No, I don't want to talk about them. I want to talk about the idea, that scene in Janeway's ready room with Chakotay, where they're talking about the possibility that Voyager is going to have to become a generational ship. And I think this is something that you've mentioned before about the idea that, and I think this is something that even we've seen a little bit with, for example, like Paris and Kim talking about the Delaney sisters, or Kes and Neelix, or what have you, that characters, crew members on Voyager are going to start pairing off because people are lonely and people are going to have to find comfort where they can. Chakotay is obviously sort of disturbed by this because he feels that it is not proper for people to be making out in the turbolift, which may or may not be true. I don't know.
Well, as Janeway says, yes, maybe some more discretion, certainly, but you can't stop them from making out.
Right. And so I think the implication that Janeway, I think, is starting to... This is the show kind of turning a corner to some degree, where the 37s seem to be kind of the end of the idea that they're going to get home quickly, right? That was the last thing, and they're not going to do it. And having this decision to stay, they decided not to stay. So they've got, okay, they're stuck for this for a while. They've been here for 6 months. There's no quick fix for this. They've had like 3 or 4 false ways to get home quickly. It's not going to happen. They also don't want to stay on a ship or stay on a planet. Everyone has decided that. That's what the end of the 37s indicated, that there's this wonderful planet that's filled with humans that seems to be idyllic that they don't want to stay on. Okay, so what does this mean? Are they going to be able to operate the ship for 75 years while they get home? No. So they're going to have to start having children. And I think Janeway is starting to say, is that what we want to do? And the show, I think, wisely doesn't come to any sort of conclusion about that. But at the end of the episode, it forces the question again because someone is pregnant.
Well, as they say, and part of the point is that they could plan their perfect society to do this as a generational ship, or they can decide fully, no, this is not going to happen. But as Jurassic Park says, life will find a way. Even if they had instituted a ban day one of no sexual intercourse on the ship, this was a woman who had gotten pregnant from her husband before leaving on the voyage in the first place. This is something that they have to deal with because they are people, because they are human or humanoid, and because, as they say, they're lonely. They have, I don't know, I think about the book Road to Wigan Pier by George Orwell, where it's talking about coal miners and in the north of England, and there's a section where they're saying, you'll have people saying, well, these people are so poor. Why are they getting married? Why are they having families? They shouldn't be doing that. Nobody who is that poor would. But people are marrying and having families because they're people. They'll fall in love. They will want to have children. This is life, and they have to accept and acknowledge that. And so they almost have to whether they want to or not, they have to factor that in. And now they do have to deal with the fact that they may become a generation ship even if they don't want to.
Right, and I think that the question was academic at the beginning of the episode, and the question seemed to be resolved when Cass decided not to try and have a child. But then, of course, the fake out. Well, it's happening whether or not you want it to, so we're going to have to deal with this. And what does that mean? I think we're going to have to see. I mean, obviously, Ensign Wildman is a new character that we've never seen before, but now that they've laid this idea down that someone is pregnant and is going to have a child, she's not going to disappear. And
she's also not going to be the last person on the ship who is going to have a child. Mm-hmm. I do love how the Ensign and Janeway have the same exact haircut. Like, apparently this is one of the standard issue Starfleet haircuts for women, so...
Yeah, there's 17 different haircuts for women and 17 different haircuts for men, and they've chosen that one.
But, which at the same time, I do wonder if there is intended to be a continuity between the two of them, because it's not incidental that I think this is the first time we hear Janeway's boyfriend's name, Mark.
Yeah, and I think I don't know if she mentioned his name in the pilot. She may have, but we did see her talking to him. So
yeah, either way, his presence is mentioned, and the fact that Janeway could I wonder if it's even subtly making the point that, even Janeway could be the one having a baby. Really, just people are going to be reproducing on the ship, and it's just going to happen. I don't know.
Yeah.
If there is a symbolic, this could just be anyone on the ship. I don't know.
Well, we're just going to have to see where that goes. And I think that's where we'll leave this episode of Trekabout. So if you have any thoughts on either of the episodes of Star Trek Voyager we just talked about, projections and Elogium, please leave a comment on the post for this episode of the podcast at TrekAboutShow.com. If you like our podcast and want to support us financially, please go to patreon.com/TrekAboutShow, where you can donate monthly. There are reward tiers there. If you donate $5 a month or more, you will get a special patrons-only episode that we release once a month. The one from May was kind of an interesting departure for us. We did what handful of original series episodes best encapsulate what that show is all about. So go to patreon.com/TrekAboutShow if you would like to donate. It also supports our other podcast, Tuning In. Just in 2 days, we are releasing the X-Files Season 1 finale episode. You won't want to miss that. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're on all those places. Trekabout Show is our username. And as always, please leave us an iTunes review for Trekabout. It is the best way for new people to find the show and keeps iTunes in business, which all is very, very important. Next week, we are going to be talking about the Voyager episodes Non Sequitur and Twisted, which I think also is the last of the Season 1 episodes that was held over for Season 2.